Hello, everyone. My name is James Faulkner, Liferay Community Tumblr. Welcome to this week's dev.life session. If you're new to dev.life, if this is your first session, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Every 2 weeks, sometimes every week, we'll do a live hangout with Liferay developers throughout our community, talking about practical and interesting things for the Liferay developer, and hopefully you guys will learn a little bit at each session. We have a lot of sessions we've already done. We've got about 10 sessions in the bank, and we'll have number 11 today. Briefly, before we get to the topic, I wanted to show you the upcoming calendar so you can be aware of what is in store for you. So I'm going to share my screen, hopefully, and you'll see my, my browser here. So today we'll be talking about Liferay Modularity with Ray in a moment. Next week, 1 week from today, will be Eduardo Garcia from our Liferay Spain office. Will be presenting and running through some hands-on topics regarding application display templates, which is a new feature in Liferay 6.2, and it's getting some really cool new stuff every day in preparation for the next Liferay release. So Eduardo will run through that. And then 2 weeks after that, on December 16th, I will have Milan Diankov from our Liferay Poland office. He's not on the calendar yet. We're still finalizing the topic that we'll be talking on, but that will be our last session for the year before the holiday break, and then we'll start fresh next year with some really cool stuff for you guys. Next year should be an interesting year for Liferay, and I hope that you can attend those sessions. Let me stop my screen share here before I send us off into a black hole. Today, I'm very pleased to have a second repeat guest. You all know him, Ray Augé, Senior Architect for Liferay, and we'll be talking about modularity. So get your pens ready and your thinking caps on, and I will hand it over to Ray. So thank you, Ray. I think I had you on the entire time staring at you. Sorry about that. Yeah, so take it away, Ray.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, production value, right?
Hey, James, how's it going?
Good, good.
So I have a little bit prepared, and what I'd like to talk about. So you mentioned modularity, and so I'm going to show a couple examples, and we're going to work in Liferay 6.2. The goal is going to be to think about how to build modular applications more than, you know, what exactly do you do to build modular, like what is the actual implementation details, which are going to be specific to your own application, but the kind of things you want to think about, maybe a little bit of the diagnostics and debugging aspects of it, and hopefully you find it informative. And I'm not sure if we have a live Q&A, James, or if we're just waiting until the end for that. Or
actually, that's a very good point. If you want to join the Q&A, we have an IRC channel, Liferay-dev-life. You can access it from the dev.life homepage at the bottom below the video feed, or if you have your own IRC client, you can join Liferay-dev-life room on Freenode, and I'll be monitoring that for questions throughout the event and interrupting Ray if necessary.
Okay, so you'll be feeding me stuff.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, good. So I guess the first thing I'll do is give a brief introduction to kind of how we have the system set up, what's available in 6.2, and briefly talk about what we're planning to do for the future, which is probably going to be our 7.0 release, which is coming, you know, at some point, hopefully sooner than later. So if you've been to any of the talks that I've done recently about modularity, or if you've heard the discussion, or if you are probably very or relatively familiar with the fact that Liferay is a very large platform. It has tons and tons of functionality, and it can sometimes get in your way. And one of the things that we're trying to do is make it easier for developers. So my my end goal, that if I can achieve anything at all for the future of Liferay, is to really make Liferay an enjoyable development experience. Because when as a software engineer, as a software developer, when you're not enjoying what you're doing, your task is already difficult enough to try and resolve business problems. And when the frameworks that you're using or the software tools that you're using, the tool chains, when those things get in your way, the task of solving problems becomes significantly more difficult. Uh, because you don't feel that you're going to be able to easily overcome problems by using a tooling that will actually work for you, and kind of what we really want is our tools that will expand our ability to solve those problems and not basically get in the way or hinder them. Liferay has traditionally been very much of you should do it this way kind of a platform, and I think that has to a certain degree hindered us. It definitely can help when you really don't have a clear vision of what you're doing. Having a lot of guidance is useful, but when you're trying to solve very specific problems, too much guidance can actually get in your way. So we are modularizing, and let's start with seeing what's in 6.2. So 6.2 is what I will call the last completely monolithic version of Liferay that we'll hopefully release. And while we were developing 6.2, and actually while we were developing 6.1, we were thinking about the future. And so in 6.2, there's an OSGi runtime. The OSGi runtime is in the, I believe in all of the releases of 6.2, is enabled by default and lives to effectively currently do nothing. And the first consumer of the OSGi runtime in 6.2 is in fact the recently released content targeting application, which was developed by a team, one of our teams in Spain. And if you've been to any of James's previous talks, I think he did a dev.life, maybe more than one, on the content targeting, and we've been talking about it at the symposiums and stuff. And that is a very highly modular application extension for Liferay, built on the premise of OSGi and on the concept of services. And so when we're talking about modularizing Liferay, one of the key concepts that we really want people to focus on are services. The reason is that services are a very good abstraction for dynamic provision of functionality. So let's cut to the chase, and actually let me see if I can share my screen here. I'm gonna turn off some things that I have open just because I don't need them. Hopefully I don't kill the screen share. Let me see if I can recall how to do this screen share thing. And I'm just going to do the entire screen. Hopefully that's not dangerous. Let me know, James.
Yep, I'm watching it. I see your screen.
Excellent. Okay. So
just be mindful of font sizes.
Font sizes, and right now, do you see clearly, or?
It's okay. If you could make it a couple points bigger, that would be better. But I don't know if it's going to mess everything up.
Give me 2 seconds, and I will do that.
Okay.
It's worth probably getting this right.
I'm not sure that's going to do it.
You don't think so?
I think you might want to change the font size within Eclipse. You can try it, but you might.
I'll do this first. There, this one. So I preserve the, and then I'll have to stop the share, right? Or does it
Nope.
automatically readjust?
It's automatic. We see your email now.
Okay. Yeah, I will close this so it doesn't distract us.
Yeah, that's pretty
So
good.
that's the first thing we'll do.
Yep.
Okay. And I'm going to delete a bunch of stuff here. This is what I have deployed, but let's move that to trash. Okay, so the first thing, let's talk about how this is all deployed, how this runs. So when you have a Liferay deployment, you have a folder structure where in the default kind of deployment scenario, you probably don't have all of this stuff, but you have typically a Liferay bundle which comes with some app server, and then inside that folder there's a data folder. And this is only relevant to 6.2. So in our case here, we have a Tomcat 7042. And then in here, the most relevant piece is this data folder. And inside the data folder, we have all of these other folders that Liferay uses for storing some of its internal repository or embedded repositories, Lucene most specifically. But inside of there now in 6.2, you'll see this OSGi folder. And inside the OSGi folder, it's broken into a couple of different folders. The state is the OSGi persistence directory. Don't mess with that guy. At least not unless you know what you're doing. And then there's the portal directory, which is where Liferay throws a whole bunch of its dependencies that it requires. These are all pretty pure OSGi libraries that are available and built by third-party communities. Like you'll see Eclipse utilities here, and there's Apache Felix. And this is actually a very interesting thing about the OSGi world, is that you have OSGi modules built by third parties all collaborating together and providing one cohesive and useful environment. So those are some of the dependencies. And then we have this other directory here, modules, where we are going to deploy some new things that we're going to work on, these new extensions that we want to build.
Hey Ray, I don't have a modules folder in my deployment.
Okay, well that's fine because you can just create it if it's not there.
Okay.
And if you were to reconfigure, so by default, normally, James, what I do is when I'm working on a bunch of OSGi stuff, typically I'm usually only working on OSGi stuff and not in a mixed mode. So I would like go to my plugins SDK, and in my build.roddy.properties file, that's my user account, I change my deploy folder. So here, if you're looking at my screen still, I have like the traditional auto deploy, which probably looks like this app server dir deploy. I usually change it to the actual OSGi modules folder. That way it doesn't get double deployed, not double deployed, but if you leave the traditional deploy folder, it's fine because it's going to get deployed into Liferay's deploy folder. Liferay is going to look at the OSGi module and say, oh, this belongs in this other deploy folder, and it's going to push it over there. But I find this speeds it up a little bit and actually gives me a couple other little advantages, but I don't need to talk about those. So I usually just tell my SDK to deploy directly into the OSGi modules. That's the gist of it. Okay, I'm going to close all this. And you can see here, if you're familiar with Eclipse, this is my Eclipse IDE. And I have a Tomcat running here. And this is the portal running. Switch over to a browser window, which I hopefully have here. Yeah, that's the one we are in. You can see that I have a running Liferay instance. And another thing I'm going to, okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to uh, tell our Liferay instance to enable um, us to do easier diagnostic. And the way that we are going to do this diagnostic is by enabling what's known as the Gogo shell. In 6.2, it's not installed by default. So we're going to install and enable the Gogo shell. I have a blog post about this, but I'm just briefly going to go through it. I'm not going to do all the downloading and everything, but I will show you the steps, and I will go very slowly. Actually, what I can probably do is point you at that other blog post just so you can get a reference. J Google Shell blog post. So here's a link to a blog post I wrote, last year, early last year, which explains how to enable Gogo Shell, and this is relevant to 6.2, and it has the steps here. So if we go back to my IDE, and I'm actually going to open the Portal ext properties. So this Portal ext properties here is the one that's in my Liferay home, and I have set as the override, so portal-ext.properties. So wherever you have your portal-ext.properties set is irrelevant. Just open that guy up, and inside we want to put some relevant lines here. The most significant one is that I want to tell the portal to start to install and start a couple of extra modules. So if you look at the blog post, there's a reference on how to get the Gogo shell. And so you need 4 bundles in our case. You need the Gogo commands, runtime, and shell modules. Oops, did I do that? Yep. And you need the Eclipse Equinox console bundle. And so if you have those bundles, you can make, so what I just added in a convenience property here where I store those in some folder on my file system. I create a property called extra bundles, and I just use that as the root path for setting up these extra, because you can use absolute file URL to some OSGi bundle, and you can tell it that you want to start using this syntax, which if you're familiar with Eclipse startup start shells, then you can, this is the syntax that comes from Eclipse, and we just borrow that. Now, Gogo, and sorry, the Eclipse Equinox console provides you with a telnet access so that it doesn't just have the shell in your sysout. You can actually start a telnet session with it. So, but in order to enable that, you have to specify this property here, which is really just OSGi console, but Liferay has this handy mechanism if you're not familiar with it. So some OSGi modules, some OSGi bundles require system properties. But in order to support these without colliding with the system, because we're running the OSGi framework underneath the Liferay web application, so there could be other OSGi frameworks running in the JVM, and we don't want to collide with those. So Liferay has this little convenience mechanism where if you prefix a property with module framework properties dot and then the name of the system property for that the OSGi bundle needs, you can define any property that is relevant to some bundles, which is really handy. So in this case, we're using it to pass in the OSGi console property to set the port on which the Equinox console should start its telnet server. So once I have that set and I start my portal, where did my IDE go? It's here. No, it's down here. So once I have started my portal and I have this set up, and James, I'm going to assume that you have this, or do you want me to?
I've set it up in the past, but for those who have not yet set it up, they'll need to download 4 jar files that I pasted the link at IRC,
Okay, perfect.
and then point at them with the extra.bundles property.
Okay, perfect. So
Do I have to run Liferay in debug mode?
no, but I mean, it's my tendency to always run Liferay in debug mode because I'm always debugging something. So you do not have to run Liferay in debug mode. I do so out of convenience. Do you want me to show you how I do my startup, or do you think that's relevant?
Sure. You mean
Okay.
in Eclipse, you push the big green button?
Yeah, so how do I do my start configuration for Tomcat? I have another blog post about that too, so you can actually read it up, but I'll briefly show it. I use a Java application startup as opposed to a server startup. And I have a Tomcat configuration, and here in my Tomcat configuration, it's the project is my portal. It's looking for the Catalina Start Bootstrap class. On the Arguments tab, it's passing what the Tomcat Bootstrap class wants for start arguments, which is
You're living pretty dangerously there with the 128 meg of perm size and 256
perhaps.
max. That's
It's never
good.
failed. It hasn't failed me yet. So, or do you mean that's too high?
No, I mean that's pretty. I think that's the default, but if you deploy tons of plugins in at least 6.1, it runs out of permgen.
That's quite possible.
Yeah.
So, yes, I usually have. I mean, this is my work configuration, so I use this all the time. And I have a whole bunch of other optional stuff, but the most significant parts of this are really that because you're basically hard coding the Tomcat startup, you have to make sure that you pass all of the relevant Tomcat bootstrap properties. The important ones are the Catalina base, the Catalina home, and the tempter. And this other logging stuff is not required, but it makes Tomcat's logging work with the Eclipse logger, so that when it prints all of the error stuff, it prints into the Eclipse console.
Is there a way to show that entire set of arguments just for
Yes,
reference?
I can do that. I will. That's a very good point.
And again, this is optional, right? If you use the default startup, you'll still get OSGi goodness.
Yeah. If you
Okay.
use the regular Tomcat start, none of this is specific to starting OSGi inside of Liferay. So here, this is the arguments that I use in the JVM arguments. There, take a screenshot of that. And of course, I have some variables set up here, and the Tomcat deploy in this scenario is just a property, an Eclipse property that's pointing to where Tomcat is deployed. So there's no magic here. Okay. All right, I'll leave that open and I might reuse it. So, and then there's one more important part, and it's actually the class path. when you're setting up the class path for your Tomcat runtime, you want to make sure that you have just the JDK, and then inside the bin directory of the Tomcat deploy, there are 3 jars. You need to make sure that those are in your boot class path for your application. And I just use a property, the variable reference here, just so I don't have to reconfigure this every time I change the Tomcat version. I can show you exactly how this looks when I start it. So now I have, sorry, mouse giving me fits. Yeah. So I usually disable all of the other runtime configurations in my IDE and only leave the debug, because I'm always running in debug and I really don't care about the other modes. So I typically have the debug. So with this start configuration, I start Tomcat directly in, and this means that if I have the Tomcat sources associated with that run config, I can debug every aspect of Tomcat from which whenever you're working with app servers, it's much more convenient to have them set up this way, directly loaded, as opposed to using the server configuration startups, because they usually don't provide debugging as easily into the app server parts. I find this much more convenient. This is just my taste, though, so it's not mandatory at all. If you already have a Liferay running instance in using some other mechanism than of 6.2, then that should be perfectly fine as well. But this puts me in debug mode, and what debug mode gives me is a list of the threads that are running, which to me I find very informative. And on my debug view, or debug view in Eclipse, of course you get all of the threads that are running, which is often very informative and very useful. And I can see here that my OSGi runtime is running because it's represented as several different threads. The most significant one is the framework event dispatcher. That's the main thread of the OSGi runtime inside of Liferay. The other one is SCR. SCR, component actor, basically is telling me that declarative services the declarative services support is running inside of the OSGi container too, because I want to use the convenience of declarative services, which I'll get into in a few minutes. But I can also see here that I'm using file install, and it's monitoring 2 directories. And the 2 relevant directories that it's monitoring are the OSGi portal, which is what I explained earlier, is the dependencies that Liferay wants for OSGi, and then the modules directory where we deploy our applications. And of course, now because we have the Gogo shell and the Eclipse console, we have the Equinox Telnet server running. And then there's all of the other stuff that Liferay needs, is all the other threads. So if I go over to a shell here and I clear this, and I can now run the telnet command. And I'm logged into the telnet server. Now, if everything worked as expected, you should be at the Gogo prompt here. I'm going to show a bunch of commands here that are useful for debugging and try to provide and show you some actual diagnostic problems you might run into. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to list off the set of bundles that are running. That's the LB. The LB command is the list bundles command. So it's a short form for the list bundles. I don't even know if there's a long form for it, but so LB lists the bundles, and you can see here that all of the bundles that are running are active. That means everything is up and okay and doing well. And you can see here we have the Apache Felix Gogo shell, we have declarative services, we have some other dependencies here, and the system bundle.
Hey Ray, if I
Okay,
install the audience targeting, would I see a whole bunch more right there?
exactly. If you installed something, particularly the audience targeting itself, I think is around 20 to 30 bundles, and so they would all be listed here. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Like well, I don't know if it's. Do you think it's important to mention that in the future? Yeah, you know what? I'm not even going to mention it. I'm just going to go from here to building something concrete. So let's go back to the IDE, and we're going to actually go through a deployment of an existing application, and then we're going to cut our teeth and actually build something new. So inside the Liferay plugins SDK, there's a few small OSGi bundles, even in 6.2. These were basically to demonstrate and become proof of concepts for how you would build small extensions to Liferay, or even just to prove out the OSGi runtime inside of Liferay. So this is a 6.2 SDK. So this is the master branch. Is it the master branch? Yes, it's the master branch of the plugins SDK. Is it really? Yep, it is. Okay. I was wanting to be on the 6.2 branch, but that's fine. Doesn't matter. So inside the plugins SDK, there's a folder called shared. And inside the shared directory, you'll note, if you have a checkout of the Liferay plugins SDK, a bundle called Gogo commands shared. And this bundle has a small Eclipse project in it, and I'm going to open. So I'm opening just the pure project itself. And this project has some classes created by Miguel Pastor, one of our senior engineers in Spain, and it's basically a small proof of concept. And I'm just going to deploy that. I'm not going to, and it basically adds a Gogo shell. So I'm going to go ant clean deploy from inside here the Gogo command shared directory in the SDK. I want to talk about more specifically the deployment part and what is happening as opposed to the code. Let's go back here to the Gogo shell, and I'm going to do a list bundle again. And what you can see here is that there's a new bundle, number 17, called Gogo commands, and I want to see what that thing is. So the first handy, the second handy command that I want to tell you about is the B command. The B command is a little introspection command for bundles, and if I do B17, it's going to print out some information. Yeah, ignore the class cast exception. There's a little bit of a data coercion bug in that particular version of the Eclipse console. So it's basically when it's trying to cast objects to pass into the commands, it sometimes has a problem casting objects. So but basically, if you were to ignore that, the B17 command did in fact run. So the output starts here. 17 is the Gogo command shared bundle that we just deployed. You can see here that it's showing some bundle information. Its status is active. Its data root folder is inside of the Liferay data OSGi state directory, so you can see exactly where its data is stored. You can see that it has this registered service. It's registered as an object, and it has all of these properties which are relevant when you're talking about OSGi services. Services typically have or always have properties, and that is the contract that makes OSGi service slightly different or a slight improvement over just a regular POJO. So in the case, so the difference in OSGi services in comparison to other more static wiring mechanisms or dependency injection frameworks, let's say like Spring, is that in those scenarios you typically have some static identifier that identifies a bean, the bean ID, and then you use that bean ID and you can reference that bean to wire it with some other bean. In the case of OSGi services, because you have potentially lots of properties, you can use a filter on the set of properties, including the type, several identifiers, to make very specific or even aggregations of things that you want to wire from together between, from one, let's say, what you would have called a bean to some other object that needs it. This is a much more powerful mechanism for wiring things together. Okay, so we have a service, and there's actually two services registered with this this module, this bundle, and it also has some service dependencies. So it has services in use here. It's using the log service and from the OSGi runtime, and you can see what its exported packages are, what its imported packages are, where it's getting those from. So this tells you all of the resolution, how things were satisfied for this bundle, which is pretty nice bunch of information. So let's move now to actually writing some new code that's going to show how to build one of these services. Go back, and because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to rewrite all of this from scratch, I'm going to go into the plugins SDK. Sorry, plugins SDK. I'm going to go into the shared folder, and just because that project is already set up with some code, I'm just going to copy the whole thing, and I'm going to paste it into a new directory. And I'm going to rename it. Call it Gogo Other. Go into there, and because it has project files, I'm going to open this project file, and I'm just going to change the name, so it's called Gogo Other.
Hey Ray, my plugins SDK does not have anything in the shared directory. Do I have an old SDK or something?
It's probably because you have an SDK bundle.
Yes.
So you probably don't have the Liferay SDK. So just to put that in context here, if I go to GitHub and if I look at the Liferay repositories, sorry, Liferay plugins, I'm talking about this repository here. So if you look inside the shared folder here, you'll see this Gogo command shared project.
Okay, so I need a copy of that repository, not the SDK that we distribute.
The SDK that we distribute is, yeah, it's empty basically. It's a pristine, clean environment for you to. So I'm basing my work off of this, and I'm wondering if maybe you can download this thing as a zip file. Can you download an individual subset from as a zip file?
I've never found a way to do it. If anyone else knows how to do that, some Git masters. You can download the whole thing, but you can't just get the one directory.
Right. And I don't recall how big the SDK is, and it might be actually faster to just get the whole thing as a zip than to, and then just go inside the zip file and grab that one plugin. That might be the easiest route. So let's say if I download this, go to temp, go to save. Okay, it's big enough. Yeah, that's probably bigger than what most people would be prepared to download. Wow, I didn't really think it was that big.
I think it's almost 300 megs.
Okay. Okay. So while you're downloading that, I'll keep talking. If you're downloading it. Okay. So I'm going to check out a couple things here. Okay, so I had the Gogo shared project in here in my Eclipse IDE. I have the plugins, but I'm going to import this other project that we just cloned because it had project files for Eclipse already. The fact that I just cloned it means that it should just load as it was, and so that's, I found it. I see the project there. I'm just adding it to my working set in my Eclipse. And there it is. So what I found when I was looking at this other command, let's take a really quick sidestep. So this other command that we installed, if I list bundles on it, and if I go Gogo command, actually when I listed it has two functions, and if you look back at the information that's listed above here, there are two functions. One is called user, and the other is called users. But when I run the command user, it says illegal, cannot coerce users to any of long, which means that it wants some input of long. And there's no help information about the users command. Yeah, if I do help users, it's telling me that the scope is Liferay. If there was a conflict between, if there were more than one users command, the scope would tell me, would let me specify which one I wanted to use, and that would look like this, Liferay.users. Give me the same output, but since there's no conflict, I can call users like this, and it gives me the same error. But it wants this long input. And when I looked at the code, because there was no documentation, I realized, hey, it wants the company ID. So if we go back to Eclipse here and I look at the Gogo command shared, and I opened this guy up, and I looked at the method that it was implementing, users, it wants the company ID. But heck, I don't know what the company IDs are. I'm, the person who's running these commands may not have any clue what the company ID is at this point. So how do we get the company IDs? Let's create a new command that's going to give us the set of companies that I can actually pass as so I can get a company ID and pass it to this user. So we're going to do that right from scratch. And so I have this copied code. I'm going to go into this root abstract command here. And I'm going to change, first of all, the abstract command that was there before, and I'm going to switch it to getting the company service. And I'll explain briefly what the mechanism here is. So, I want company local service. I'm going to change this abstract method. And then I'm going to change this protected variable to be an instance of company local service. So now my abstract, I have this abstract class, abstract command, which is in my copied bundle. And I've set a set company local service method and a protected property. Now you don't have to implement it this way, but this just happens to be how the code was. But now you'll notice that these two commands that lived there they now have errors. And I want to get the list of companies. So I'm going to go into the users one, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename this guy to companies. Okay. So now I have a company's command class, and it's giving me errors because, I didn't implement this method that it wants. Okay. So auto-completion helps me out. It gives me this method, implementation, but that's not enough information. What I'm trying to tell the system here is that I need an instance of the company local service, the OSGi service, not the Liferay service term, but an OSGi reference to a service called company local service. And to do that, I want to make a reference. So first of all, what is this thing? What is this class that I'm using here? How does this thing work? First of all, a brief introduction to components and declarative services. So OSGi is the main abstraction, the main primitive that we want to focus on when we're working in OSGi are services. A very convenient framework within the OSGi ecosystem to create services is called declarative services. Now, declarative services is a way of defining through declaration a POJO or an object which should be registered as a service or should consume other services as references. And what we're doing here in this company command, we've annotated it with the component annotation. In this case, it's using the acute, but let's change this to the OSGi annotations. There's a couple of different sets of annotations, but to be standards compliant, we're going to use the org OSGi service component annotation component. Now this annotation is what tells the system that we are trying to create a service, and it's going to manage the complexity of this for us. And it has a couple of attributes. Let me start here just by commenting this out, and let's get some help from the IDE. So I have with this component, I've told the system when this deploys that this class should be instantiated, go through a proper service registration process, and be registered in the OSGi service registry. And it's going to get certain properties such as a service ID and a service name and a service ranking. And it's getting some default properties, but in this case, I want to enrich the default properties by passing some other properties that are relevant to creating Gogo commands. So in order to create a Gogo command, I have to pass a couple of Gogo specific properties, which Miguel had abstracted into these constants. And if I look at these constants here, the constants were the property names for the properties that the Gogo engine requires in order to find services and add them as Gogo functions in the Gogo shell. And it needs two, Gogo command function and Gogo command scope. Now, when we look back at our class, our component, which we had copied from previous, had the function was users, and the scope was Liferay. We like the scope Liferay, that's relevant, but the scope function, we want to make it companies. Because that's the actual word that we're going to input into the console as the name of the function, and that's going to trigger the operation. So we're going to change that to companies. Okay, so now we have our component. The next thing we're telling the system is, what are we registering the service as? By default, OSGi services should implement interfaces. So whenever you register services into the service registry using this mechanism, you want to tell the OSGi registry as much information as possible. In this particular case, you need to tell it which interfaces it's consuming so that other callers can use that type. In this case, the only service type that we need to tell Gogo that we're publishing our service as is an object. And so that's where we're using this service property of the component annotation to specify the class. This could also be an array, so I can put as many interfaces as I wanted on this service. But in this case, I just need the one. Okay. So now I'm now publishing this companies command class, this Pojo, as an object service with the properties OSGi command function equals companies, OSGi command scope equals Liferay. Now, to make this function useful, it has a dependency on some other functionality of the system, which is represented as itself as a service. And I need to get one of these services. In order to do that, I need a reference to this service. And so I'm going to use the reference annotation from org OSGi service from the same package. Okay? So that's going to, so when the processing engine, when the declarative services processing engine, which is called the SCR, so service component runtime, when it reads this object, when this reads this company's command, the metadata for this company's command, it's going to wire the service into dynamically. Let's also store a reference to it so that we can actually reuse the instance that we get. Okay. The wonderful thing here is that this is a completely dynamic system. And simply by having created this method and creating this reference, if this service were ever to leave the runtime, if it were to go away, this entire component would be deactivated before the service goes away, not consequently, not after the fact. Okay. Now, we had some other code here, which because we copied this other class, we want to change this method, this function, to be a list of companies. And I don't want to have to pass in any information because I don't know any of the information. I just want a list of all the companies in the system. So I'm removing the inputs, and I'm going to change this reference to company local service. I'm going to remove all of this, and I'm going to do get companies. Companies is going to return me a list of companies, and I'm going to say portal instance has I'm going to change the instance to deploy just portal, just to not confuse it. Okay, so portal has this many companies, and I'm going to change this iteration. Companies companies, company name, and I'm going to change this to, I'm not even sure what information companies have, so let's just introspect that with, oops, get. Let's see what's interesting here. Let's do a web ID. Web ID and company ID. All right. Okay, so now I have a command, company ID, this other class. This was a class which from the other bundle was listing the information for one user, apparently. Okay, that might be useful. Let's change this. Let's at least solve the compile error temporarily. The company command, continue. I'm just following the same process here, changing this. Okay, and it's going to be a reference. Oh, right. I wanted to change these. Just again to comply with the standard. You can use the B&D annotations too, if the old B&D annotations, but I would highly suggest reverting to the more recently available OSGi annotations. We're all good here? Yep. Oh. And temporarily, I'm just going to blank this guy out. Let's start with our, and then this one would be called. Okay, so this module, what had I called it again? I had called it Gogo Other Shared Master. I'm going to go into the folder where this Gogo Other Shared Master. Ant clean deploy. Alrighty. Go back to our Gogo shell, list bundles. Oh, now I have two. It's because I never changed the name of my bundle, but that's fine. I'm just going to leave it like that for now. Actually, no, I'll show you how easy it is to change this stuff. Let's go back. I had a B&D file in here. I'm just going to look at the source. I'm going to go Gogo other commands. Yes. Okay. So inside the Gogo other shared master project, the one that we cloned, there was a B&D file. The B&D file contains the metadata for the bundle, and inside there's a bundle name, which is what's showing up in the console. So I just changed the name so we'd have a little bit more context of which one we're running. And if we go back to our little deploy task, clean deploy, that should update. Just give it a second. Now we have two sets of Gogo commands and Gogo other commands. Now I'm going to use my B command again, B19, enter, and you can see here it's my new bundle, and I have service in use, No registered services. Okay, why didn't we have any registered services? So apparently I did something wrong, which is good. This is often going to happen, and so we need to figure out what it is that we did that why we don't have a company or why we don't have a service. So let's look through the issue here. Let's see if we can diagnose why we don't have a service. Let's go to the Gogo command, the Gogo shell. And the first thing I want to do, actually the first thing I want to do before I even do that is to make sure that the metadata got generated. So these annotations that we're using for declarative services are actually build time annotations being processed by a build time annotation processor. And what's actually happening behind the scenes is an XML file is being generated inside the bundle with the component configurations. So if I want to make sure that this gets registered as a service properly, it certainly has to have the proper XML generated into the resulting jar file. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into the folder where we deployed this. And that, if you recall, was inside the Liferay Home Data OSGi modules directory. So you can see the commands that the jar files that we deployed. The Gogo commands shared and the Gogo other shared. And if all went well, if everything got built properly inside this jar, there should be OSGi declarative services configuration file. What does that look like? So let's look inside the jar file. Inside the jar file, there's should be an OSGi inf directory. Actually, before that, let's look at the manifest. The manifest is the central place for all of the information for OSGi bundles. If I look at the manifest, it'll have all this metadata. And when I look at the metadata, specific to declarative services, it has a header called service component. And the service component should have some reference to some configuration files, which are XML files. So thanks, Miguel. So we have here some configuration files, and let's see if they are properly set up. So by default, the annotation processor creates them just using the name of the class and an XML. So let's see what our company's file looks like. It's a very simple XML file. Okay. It's saying I have a component, the class is company's command, an implementation class is company's command, it's a service providing interface object, that's all good. It has a dependency on the company local service, which is the interface is company local service. The method that it should use to bind that command is set company local service. So everything here appears to be well set up. So that should mean that the SCR service, the SCR runtime, should have some information for us. So technically speaking, the jar file looks to be set up properly. The next step for debugging why our SCR our component didn't get registered, our service didn't get registered, is to run some SCR commands. And the first useful command for introspecting declarative services components is called SCR list, which will list all of the components registered in the OSGi runtime. Okay, and so I see here that there are two. but there should be four. There should be the company commands. So why don't we have the company commands? Bundle B19. Wait, hold on. Command user version. Here we go. Exported. It's because, I believe it's because we have a split package issue. In other words, there's two bundles in the system that are exporting the same version of the same package, which is confusing the OSGi runtime. Here we see that there's a com liferay Gogo commands user. But if I look at the B, let's go list bundles again, and let's go packages. If I'm gonna check. Packages is the next useful command. Packages, the packages command tells you from where in the system is a package being exported. And if I list the com liferay Gogo commands user package, I see it's being published by two services. Not only that, but it's being published with the same package version. So this is confusing the OSGi runtime. It doesn't want to allow or to bind two of the same package versions to the declarative services runtime. So what's the solution? Simple enough. We should have fixed this in the beginning, which would have been to specify a distinct package for our new bundle. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to move. I'm going to go refactor, move, and I'm going to change. No, I'm just going to rename the package. And I'm going to call it commands companies. Okay, it's going to refactor the code. You gotta love Eclipse refactoring. Now, there's one more thing we need to do.
Hey, Ray, before you go there, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there a global registry to avoid this problem? How do you know your package name is not going to conflict?
That's a very good point. And the only way that you would know that your packages are conflicting is through this kind of knowledge. Like, I was aware that SCR might behave this way if I had a split package scenario. That's a little bit tricky. So really the best solution is to first of all use a proper private domain for the root of your packages, and then simply make sure that your package namespace is unique. This won't always be a problem. It'll only be a problem in certain types of scenarios. In this case, declarative services doesn't really like it. So it's probably one of those a little bit more difficult to solve problems. But if you should be relatively sure that your packages are unique.
Is it going to ever be a problem during an upgrade where you're upgrading the same service to a new version?
No, because services should be provided through bundles, right? So you should be upgrading the bundles. So it doesn't matter if those bundles get restructured as long as the packages are, like Liferay, for instance, would never put the same package at the same version in two bundles. All right, we're going to try our best effort to never do that. That would be a bug to do this. Okay, so let me go back and change the BND file. In the BND file, we had these packages. You know what? We can simplify this even further by removing all of the exports and just letting BND deal with the package names itself. So here, I've just removed inside the BND file. I'm removing the package reference names and letting BND calculate that. So let's go back here. Okay. Okay. Still didn't. Why? Oh. Okay. Plugins. Shared. What did I do differently here? Here I have service component. See if I should have let Indy do this on its own. Or E20. And Google shared, provided, services in use. It's still CR list. Okay, still obviously did something that it didn't like. Is the company's command. Is the company method. What did I do here? Service. I switched from the annotations to the OSGi. I still have the company commands. This is fine. Package is different. Set company. Reference. Okay. As a safety backup, I had just implemented. Where is it? Where did my IDE just go? Okay, here. So as a safety backup, I have the plugin already implemented in a different folder. It's called Gogo New Command Shared, and I will import that one into my IDE. New, or sorry, import existing projects, shared, new. Okay. Okay, this one was still using the acute components. The acute components are the legacy annotations. So we have the same class using different annotations, and technically speaking, new clean deploy. I'm unless for some reason it's not in the right place. Home, Liferay data, OSGi, modules, new commands, other commands, bundles, new commands, E21. This one is registering its services. Okay, so here we have the company's command and the company command. So if we go back to the IDE just briefly, the company's command was set up so that we could get a list of all the companies, and it's basically just printing them out. So we have companies command, and we have our printout. Portal has 1 company. The company ID is 10157. So now I can use my users command. Users for 10157, and I get my users. Company 10157 has 2 users, the default and the test. So with relatively little effort, we were able to create new commands using the annotations, and basically get portal services as references, and there's no static usage of the Liferay services in the traditional sense. We're getting real interfaces here with a real implementation without being bound statically to the service. And if these services come and go, then our components will be shut down for us. So this actually handles a lot of the complexity of the life cycle of the OSGi modules for you. Basically, with using declarative services in this way, you have to worry much less about, for instance, the start order of your bundles, because you're not using because there's no dependency on the start order using services in this way. So the difference between 7.0 and 6.2 is that Liferay has many more integration points into the core portal. But that doesn't mean that Liferay 7 or 6.2 can't be integrated, or you can't integrate in areas where you can't use OSGi services. So if we look at Liferay portal and we look at the Liferay service API, there are many different APIs here. Some, let's say, there's probably, let's look inside the portal kernel. Let's look at the scheduler API. So the scheduler API lets you register new background jobs, and how that's implemented in 6.2 is basically there's an interface to an engine which lets you add a job and to delete jobs. So you can create scheduler entries and you can delete scheduler entries. Now this is done through a global registry of its own. This is not tied to a service registry at all. But if I wanted to use this functionality from an OSGi bundle in 6.2, I could still do it by using components and without using a legacy plugin mechanism. So let's see how that happens. So let's go back to our plugins SDK. I'm again going to copy the command shared. I'm just going to copy it, and I'm going to go edit, paste. And I'm going to go scheduler, new scheduler shared. The new scheduler shared, I'm going to get the project name and change project configuration. I'm also going to open up the B&D file. I'm going to change this to new scheduler. I'm going to remove the import package, the export. I'm going to remove all of that and just leave the bundle name and the include resources. Okay. Now I'm going to import this into my IDE. And it's called new scheduler shared. I'm going to add it to my project. Finish. I'm going to remove these other projects just for now. First thing I'm going to do is change the package name. Call it .new scheduler. Okay. I'm going to delete some of the things that I don't need here. I'm going to go into this user command class. I'm going to rename it to scheduler. So remove all of the existing functionality. I guess I could have just started with a new class. Okay, so I have a pristine component, and it's a scheduler, and I want to use a scheduler API. The scheduler API looks like adding a job. I need a trigger, add a scripting job. Let's add a script. No, let's just add a regular job. So storage type, type description, destination. Scheduler. So in order to create a new scheduler, I want to use a lifecycle where when my component activates, it's going to add a scheduler job, and when it deactivates, it's going to unschedule the job. So I need this lifecycle of activation and deactivation. In order to do that, it's very simple, just another set of annotations that I need to apply. I'm just going to add a protected, or let's just go public. Public void activate method, and this annotation activate. I'll use the cute ones, and I'm going to go with a similar deactivate, public void deactivate. Okay. So now, in the scheduler util, I want to add a job. Okay. So in order to create a scheduler, and if I wanted to use this component to add a job, I could use the API this way. Remove my job name. So let's create a new job. Okay, let's find a case where this is used. So we need a trigger. Trigger. There you go. Um, ah, this wasn't exactly the. Okay. So creating a new trigger. Here we go. Create a cron trigger. I'm gonna look for this is where till spring. Actually, I have to look for the until the scheduler targets. Liferay scheduler engine. And, oh man, destination message. Message. Oh. message type this. Yeah, actually this is an object from does it have a no art constructor? Yeah, it does. There you go. And then a message, and then message listener class name. Last name, portlet ID, I think you can leave that no, and exceptions max size 0. All right. Now I need let's surround this with this try catch. Dump the arrow dot trace. And here, I'm gonna resume. I'm gonna unschedule or
Delete.
hmm?
Delete. Or unschedule.
Yeah, unschedule schedule entry name job name. Okay, unschedule job name my job. And then job name, group name. In here. Storage type, storage type dot memory, and okay. Okay, so so uh, basically what I'm trying to get to here is that you can still use OSGi components to access Liferay functionality which isn't yet designed to accept OSGi services. And by using a proper lifecycle, you can add your functionality when your module deploys or when your component activates, and removes your functionality when your component deactivates. And now if we deploy this, scheduler and clean deploy. Okay, deployed. Let's bundle new scheduler B22. Okay, so this is where I wanted to demonstrate something here, which was, did it activate? It did activate. Oops. Let's bundle. 22 started. I'm a little confused why it's not running the services. Scheduler shared. Oh, it didn't. It didn't generate the. It didn't generate the service component. And that might be because I deleted it, but it shouldn't be needed. Let's re-add it. Let's go back to the BND file. There we go. E23. There we go. So the service is registered. So what I'm going to show, if I can, is that this actually went through the proper life cycle, and I was having this issue earlier. Never upgrade your IDE the day you're doing a demo, because for whatever reason my debug is no longer working. Stop. Oh, it's 23. Stop 23. Did it actually stop? Yes. Okay. Start 23. It's not triggering the debug mode, which is not letting me show you that it's actually going through the life cycle. But so the most of Liferay's APIs, which were based on this old mechanism in 6.2 and in previous versions of Liferay, almost all of Liferay's integration points were implemented as as kind of a static integration point. In other words, there was a static utility class that had some kind of add method and then a cooperative method for removing. And this is how all of the extensions that Liferay built for the portlets, all of the, everything that's a public API for integration points were built this way. So the point I'm trying to get at here is that you can use OSGi in 6.2 to access these integration points. The only difference is that you basically have to self-register your own. You're registering or using that API directly from within your OSGi components. But that doesn't mean that your OSGi components can't use services of their own properly and collaborate together. So for 7.0, we basically did all of this work for you. We removed all of these kind of, we didn't remove them, but we provided a new way to access all of this functionality by basically making all of these static integration points aware of OSGi services internally, so that when you register a component such as this one into the OSGi runtime, you could directly implement some interface on your from your OSGi services, pass some properties, and those would end up automatically into the integration points. And we've done to date almost all of the integration points in 7. So in 6.2, it's a little bit more difficult because you have to use these old APIs yourself. If you're familiar with them already, it might actually be easier to use it this way. But in 7.0, we've done a lot of work to simplify this process for you.
Will you still be able to use the old style integration points in 7?
Yeah, you should be, because we haven't removed any of these static utilities yet. And I mean, the difference is that we may have added new integration points which don't have this kind of static utility. So you would have to use, well, you would never have used those in legacy code anyways. So yeah, you will be able to use this mechanism, but it would probably be much nicer to use the new mechanism, because it actually reduces your boilerplate quite a bit. Um, any questions, James?
I don't see any right now on IRC. I did have one other question about the
Yes.
Gogo shell.
Okay.
Actually, two questions. The first question is, can you invoke Liferay APIs from the shell? And the second question is, can you write scripts and save them to disk and then load them later and run them and build like a library of useful DevOps kind of scripts?
Yes, you can in both cases. Executing, and you're probably more familiar with this than I am. I'm trying to recall the syntax. There's a syntax for executing the Liferay commands as a Gogo. It's like a load class, I believe. Org. All right, no. Liferay dot portal dot service dot company local service util as company local service util. Gosh, you remember what the
I just pasted them into the Google chat. Some of the examples we used with numbers at the beginning, so you can ignore those.
which is in the browser window, which I can't find, which is in the Google chat.
Yeah, the topmost icon on the left. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about the numbers at the start.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
I can give you a URL, which might be easier actually. Which is the that one there.
Right. So, yeah, the add command and the load class. Okay, so the add command. This is the one I'll reproduce here. It's add command company local service util load class, and then Liferay service util. What was it? Oh, the load class command you actually have to load as well, right? It's been a little while since I added this add command class. Oh, do you have to set the scope, James?
Yeah, I think you do.
And when you don't use this stuff every
You
day,
can prefix everything with Gogo.
right? Did I need that one though, or do I need? I don't think I need that one, but that's fine. Yeah. So now the add command should work. Su dot get. I think I can even just go. Is it dot notation or I don't remember. No. Something like this. Oh,
I think there's an example in that.
yeah. The colon. There we go. So you can execute the methods. So you can create collections, and these the Gogo configuration and the set of scripts. I think you can load the scripts directly from the shell by referencing them using a full path URI, right? I believe, but trying to remember, there is a configuration in the Gogo shell. If you look at the Felix project, let's say I go to Felix Gogo project, there are some configuration options which actually let you bootstrap yeah, so here you have this is the configuration. There's some configuration values that let you actually pre-populate the shell with a set of commands so that when you initialize the runtime, it already has your commands listed, just like you would with your .profile or your .bashrc file for your command. I'm trying to remember if those are properly documented or if they're a little bit of magic that you have to research inside the Gogo implementation. But yeah, Gogo's pretty powerful and allows you to do a lot of things. And we do have plans to add some functionality through Gogo. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool because like I remember back when I was working at Oracle on Web Center, they had this crazy Python shell that you could like batch archive database tables in individual rows and put them in separate databases for performance, all from the command line. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. What I personally would really like to see is like a REPL or a subshell into like a Groovy or another more familiar language. I mean, this is relatively powerful, but I think it would be nice if we could execute Groovy code. That would be much more. You should actually write almost pure Java and just execute it right in the shell. That would be pretty cool.
Okay, so we're coming up on 2 hours.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Is there anything else you would
Unless
like to
you
share?
have any questions.
I still don't see any on IRC, so I guess we don't have any for now. I got all my questions answered. I thought
Okay.
this is pretty cool. So, oh, actually, there's one more thing I just want to reiterate. So, if you're a Liferay 6.2 developer and you see all this wonderful new stuff, and you're wondering what the transition would be, what are your recommendations? Number one, if you don't want to learn any of this stuff and you just want to keep doing what you used to be doing, and number two, if you do want to get into the new way of doing development in Liferay 7, what are your recommendations for next steps?
So, um, one of the recommendations I have for next steps is to probably try to get involved. Okay, to let's start at the beginning. You asked about
Yeah, if
what
you're
if
afraid of
we
this, you're going to
yeah
have to do all kinds of new stuff, and everything you've
okay
learned up to this point is now
yeah.
worthless.
So we have put a lot of effort into creating uh, a compatibility layer, I guess you could call it, which supports legacy style plugins in Liferay 7.0. So what that looks like is basically you're still using the SDK the way it was. You're still building your traditional portlet war files and your theme wars and all of those, and you're still building and deploying them the same way, except that when they get deployed, we convert them automatically to OSGi modules for you, OSGi bundles for you, and so there's really very little that you have to do. However, you should realize that this is a major version. So the Java APIs, we've obviously took liberties to make major improvements to our APIs. So you would certainly have to deal with those first level compilation things. But beyond that, you can continue to build in the traditional way. You can still build your wars, your themes, and everything like that in the traditional way, and they will deploy directly onto Liferay without further changes, without you having to adopt, let's say, OSGi directly inside your implementation.
Does that include JSP and JSP overrides you might have in place?
Yes, there will be there may be some slight changes you have to make. For instance, let's say you made JSP overrides to bookmarks, and we've extracted bookmarks into its own set of modules. You may have to make a slight change to your configurations to say that this is an override for the blogs or for the bookmarks portlet, and so that will still happen. It will just be a change in your hook definition to indicate which context path this JSP override works for, because
Okay.
they won't be bundled in the core anymore, right? So the default scenario, the default we had before was there's no indication of where this JSP override is, because the only place you can override is in the core. So we'll have a further configuration which will say this JSP override needs to go with the blogs portlet.
And I'm assuming that if all I do is update that path, that Liferay will not know that the bookmarks service is deployed or is not deployed and should not deploy my portlet if I don't adopt any of the dependency mechanisms in OSGi.
That's not well. So in the case of the JSP hook, it probably would do nothing. It probably would have zero side effect, and it would probably still let your plugin deploy. But in the cases where you're actually consuming other services from other plugins, and we've extracted those plugins, then your bundle wouldn't be initialized. Your bundle wouldn't go through the start process, because it has a dependency on some actual Java code, and that Java code isn't there. So the OSGi runtime would just not run your plugin.
But how does it know that my code depends on it if I don't adopt any of the dependency mechanisms?
Because we're introspecting the code. We're basically
cool.
doing a bytecode analysis of the code that's being deployed when we are converting it to an OSGi bundle. So we see all of the uses. The only uses we don't see are like pure reflection.
Right.
If you're using class 4 names, then we don't see those. We don't see those.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, and then the second part of the question was, if I want to start learning more about this, what should I do?
Yes. So we have a big effort right now of working on the tool chains and the documentation for how to proceed with this. So we're very, and when I say we, I mean Greg Amerson, who's our tooling lead, and one of our GS consultants, Kamesh Sampath, and myself. We're working very hard to build a complete set of examples and some start paths. So basically what we have in the new dev guide, which is learning paths. We're working on some learning paths that are going to demonstrate the uses of the integration points and how to. We're actually going to have bootstrap projects which are going to have real code in them in the tool chain that you prefer, which you're going to be able to start from with documentation on how that is all put together and how it works. So we're currently on that effort right now. We to this to until a couple of months ago we were 100% just working on the actual conversion, and now we've got quite a significant effort on the documentation side. So I would say that you should look closely at the Liferay docs. You should look closely at let's say blog posts and that Greg and I will be publishing in the next little bit. And we also have Jamie Salmons, who is going to be helping with us with some of the documentation as well. So, yeah.
And also a shameless plug for the Liferay 7 milestone builds.
Yes.
Which we're up to milestone 2 right now. We haven't made a lot of noise about it because it's early stages. We're kind of planning on doing them every 2 months or so. And then in the coming milestone builds, we're going to start ramping up our community beta program for testing like we did with Liferay 6.2. So shameless plug for that. Look for that in December, January timeframe. And hopefully we'll be able to get that out very shortly in the next 1 or 2 milestone builds. So another way to get involved. And of course our forums and our blogs and IRC in particular. Radio Liferay, the new dev.liferay.com website, the Liferay Developer Network. If you haven't checked that out, it's got a lot of really cool stuff, like Ray was mentioning, the learning paths. We're seeing new learning paths and tutorials every day, so we're going to continue to populate that as well.
So in the chat, I'm not sure if you see it, there's a small little project link there to a GitHub repository where we're focusing our efforts to create what are several different toolchain bootstrap projects. So basically you can go here to this project and it's called Blade. Right now it's on my private repo, but we're gonna reorganize that. But and we appreciate any input from anyone on this. But basically what it is one repository which contains examples for all of the major tool chains. Right now we have Maven, Gradle, and B&D tool chains there. And inside, let's say in the Maven repository, we have one project which shows you how to use declarative services, one project which shows you how to use OSGi Blueprint, one which uses the pure API, and then inside of there we're going to also have for each of the tool chains many examples of using the integration points and how to build plugins on top of Liferay. So you'll be able to do it from Gradle, you'll be able to do it from Maven, you'll be able to do it from hopefully as many tool chains as we can cover. And right now we're focusing on those 3, but we hopefully if we can get some input for even Ant or any of the other tool chains, if we can get someone to contribute some SBT examples, even that would be awesome.
Cool. And I saw a question on IRC from Bijan, but I think you already answered it. His question was around how the OSGi stuff will affect the dev lifecycle. In particular, how do you development, of course, has changed. Then you deploy, the deployment and the redeployment after you fix a bug that you find. Mm-hmm. That sounds like, I think from what you said, it's pretty much business as usual. Ant deploy still works. Maven install still works.
Yeah.
Right-clicking or dragging in Eclipse still works down to your server, and so it really doesn't change much as far as the development workflow. It's more about the dependency mechanism and API changes and declarative services.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, this just opens more doors for more deployment possibilities, because we could use deployment managers such as Apache Ace, which can deploy to clusters and whatnot, so regardless of what app server. One of the beautiful things here is that we can take control of the deployment of our plugins so that we can have a app server agnostic deployment, and we can use agents, and there's a lot of potential. So we're investigating lots of different exciting opportunities there, even to the point of having, let's say you're working, B&D Tools has this in its own development cycle right now, not when you're using it with Liferay, but in its own tool chain right now. When you make code changes, it automatically recompiles and redeploys your bundles. So you don't even have to go through the start, and deploy process. And we'd like to integrate that as well into our development cycle so that you don't have to continuously move from your IDE to your shell or to your commands, and you can just keep working and writing code, and as it compiles, it automatically gets redeployed, and you can immediately see the result and access that.
So there's another question on performance. So will redeploys be much faster with OSGi, in particular, starting to compete with JRebel kinds of stuff?
Actually it is. But you have to be careful here. Where it gets a significant speed up is by having much smaller modules, right? So if you have very, very large modules with 50, 60 libraries in it, and you're still doing that whole assembly phase, building SAS files and doing merges and all of these things, those are all very build intensive operations, and they'll still take time. So that's really where the time is spent. But even, let's say, when you're installing a bundle and it's activating and it has to do class path analysis, the longer that class path is that it has to run through for your module to deploy. So an OSGi bundle that has 3 or 4 or 5 classes in it will load practically instantaneously. In those scenarios, we'll be able to have a very, very, very fast redeploy life cycle. And so that's where we think, that's where I'm seeing that we can have a significant speed up in development time in the cycle.
Okay. Okay, last question.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, we have one more question. Yeah, he's just confirming what you said. So last question, when will we see you back on IRC?
Hopefully very soon. I've been thinking about it. I was away from my office for about 4 weeks just recently. I just got back on Monday, and I'm kind of a little bit still out of the loop and trying to get back in. But this year was intense. This year was intense in the sense that there were a lot of battles to fight. There was a lot of code to write, a lot of code to delete, and a lot of things going on. So I'm hoping to get back to IRC. I would love to say that by the new year I'm back in the IRC.
You mean you don't have like just hours and hours per day to just hang out and chat with us?
If I can reduce my workload a little bit to where I can just think, a few hours a day as opposed to just, then yeah, I would love to. I would love to. I actually miss it a lot. So
I think you get a pass no matter what. Okay. So thank you, Ray, for spending the last 2 hours with us. Again, this session is recorded. It will show up on YouTube in about 5 or 10 minutes. And again, next week we'll have Eduardo Garcia talking about application display templates, another fun topic for Liferay 6.2.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, it is fun. I really like that one. It was actually my favorite new feature in Liferay 6.2. So, and it's getting some really cool stuff in the next version as well. So,
Yeah.
and hopefully one day we'll be able to actually deploy them or publish them on the marketplace as independent display templates, and maybe OSGi shell scripts in the future. Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and we'll sign off for now. See you, Ray. Stay warm. And to everyone else, thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
All right.